Welcome to Serenity Path, where the journey of the mind takes center stage. Have you ever wondered why we think endlessly, even when we want to find peace? In this video, we'll dive deep into the nature of our thoughts, explore the science behind them, and uncover ancient Buddhist wisdom that can guide us toward true stillness. This is not just another meditation video, it's a path to understanding the mind in a way you've never experienced before. Stay with us until the end, because the insights you'll gain here will forever change the way you approach your thoughts. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, as we embark on this enlightening journey together. Part 1, The Problem of Endless Thinking. In our fast-paced world, it feels as though our minds never stop. The moment we wake up, the thoughts begin, like a floodgate opening. What's on my to-do list today? What did I forget last night? Am I prepared for that meeting? The thoughts are constant, each one following the other in a never-ending cascade. For many, it's like a race with no finish line, one that leaves us feeling overwhelmed, distracted, and disconnected. This is the problem of endless thinking. The Buddha called it samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, not just in the physical sense, but in the mental world as well. In the same way that we constantly cycle through experiences, our minds cycle through thoughts. The problem, however, lies not in thinking itself but in our attachment to those thoughts. Just like a river flowing continuously, the mind stream of thoughts doesn't pause or stop unless we intentionally guide it. Imagine trying to read a book, but someone keeps turning the pages faster than you can read. This is what it feels like when the mind is caught in a whirlwind of endless thoughts. You're aware that there's something in front of you, something you want to focus on, but the noise around you makes it nearly impossible to see clearly. Your mind keeps racing, jumping from one thought to the next, making it hard to grasp any one idea fully. It's frustrating. This is where the Buddha's teachings offer us a way out. Buddhism teaches that the first arrow of suffering is the unavoidable pain of life, loss, illness, hardship, or even just the passage of time. This is something we cannot escape. However, what makes this suffering more intense is the second arrow, the mental anguish we inflict upon ourselves through overthinking and attachment to our thoughts. For example, imagine you lose your job. The first arrow is the pain of the loss, but the second arrow is all the thoughts that follow. How will I pay my bills? What will people think of me? Will I ever be successful again? The Buddha taught that while we cannot avoid the first arrow, we can control whether or not we let the second arrow pierce us. The mind's endless chatter is like a second arrow, and it's this mental noise that adds to our suffering. We can think of our thoughts as clouds in the sky. Sometimes, the sky is clear, and sometimes, the clouds are thick, heavy, and stormy. But if we attach to those clouds, if we try to chase them or hold on to them, we can't see the clear sky. Our thoughts are similar. If we attach to them, let them dictate our emotions and actions, we become trapped in a cycle of endless suffering. But if we can let go, just like a cloud passing across the sky, we can find a moment of peace. One of the biggest contributors to this endless cycle of thinking is our attachment to the concept of the self. Buddhism teaches that we are not our thoughts, our emotions, or our experiences. The idea of a permanent, unchanging self is an illusion. Yet, we constantly chase after this illusion. It's like trying to grab water with a clenched fist, it slips through our fingers every time. The more we try to hold on to this self, the more we struggle, and the more we suffer. A Buddhist parable illustrates this well. Once, a student asked the Buddha, "What is the self?" The Buddha replied by asking the student to pick up a leaf from the ground. "Do you see this leaf?" he asked. "Yes, I see it," the student responded. "What happens to this leaf once you let go of it?" the Buddha asked. The student replied, "It falls to the ground." "Exactly," said the Buddha. In the same way, we grasp onto our sense of self, but the moment we let go, it falls away. The leaf is still part of the tree, just as we are part of the whole, but we don't need to hold on to it tightly. It can exist naturally without our constant control. This story illustrates how we hold on to the concept of self, trying to define ourselves through our thoughts, experiences, and roles. But just as the leaf is part of the tree, we too are part of something greater. When we let go of the illusion of the self, the mind can quiet, and we can experience a deeper connection to the world around us. So, what can we do to break free from the endless cycle of thoughts? The Buddha's teachings emphasize the importance of mindfulness. Mindfulness is the practice of observing thoughts, feelings, and sensations without judgment. Instead of trying to control or eliminate thoughts, mindfulness teaches us to observe them as they come and go. It's like sitting by the river, watching the leaves float by. You don't need to pick up every leaf and analyze it, you simply watch it float past, allowing it to go on its way. The key to mindfulness is not to avoid thoughts but to stop identifying with them. When we become aware that we are not our thoughts, we begin to see them for what they are, temporary, fleeting, and ultimately unimportant. This doesn't mean that we stop thinking altogether, rather, we learn to think without becoming attached to our thoughts. A story from the Buddha's life illustrates this beautifully. One day, a disciple came to him, troubled by his constant thoughts of anger and desire. He asked the Buddha how to stop these thoughts. The Buddha replied with a question: if a man is walking in a forest and encounters a poisonous snake, what should he do? The disciple replied, he should avoid it or kill it. The Buddha smiled and said, exactly. But if you kill the snake, more snakes will come. Instead, simply step out of the way. In the same way, when negative thoughts arise, don't engage with them. Step aside. Let them pass by. This story highlights that we don't need to engage with every thought, especially the negative ones. By practicing mindfulness, we can let them pass without creating more mental suffering for ourselves. Just as we wouldn't try to fight every snake we encounter, we don't need to fight every thought that arises. Let's take a practical example. Think about the last time you felt stressed or anxious. Perhaps it was about an upcoming event, a project at work, or a conversation with a friend. In that moment, your mind was likely filled with racing thoughts. You might have replayed past events or imagined future scenarios, all the while adding layers of worry and tension to the situation. But imagine if, instead of engaging with those thoughts, you simply took a deep breath and let them go, like leaves floating down the river. The stress and anxiety would begin to dissipate. In the same way, if we stop engaging with our thoughts, especially the ones that cause us pain and suffering, we can find relief. Just as a person can let go of the weight of a heavy bag, we too can put down the heavy burden of overthinking. Through the practice of mindfulness, we can experience the freedom that comes from not being ruled by our thoughts. And, in time, we can learn to step aside, allowing our minds to find moments of stillness amidst the chaos of daily life. Part 2, The Science Behind the Mind's Default Mode Network. To understand the endless thinking process, it helps to turn to science, specifically, the fascinating concept of the default mode network, DMN. The DMN is like the brain's background operating system, quietly running in the background when we're not focused on anything specific. Imagine it as the hum of an engine that continues even when the car is idle. This network is active when we're daydreaming, reminiscing about the past, planning for the future, or simply letting our thoughts wander. From a Buddhist perspective, this is strikingly similar to the restless mind the Buddha described, the mind that is never at peace, always jumping from thought to thought, never grounded in the present moment. The Buddha spoke of the mind as a monkey, constantly swinging from branch to branch, never still. In many ways, the DMN embodies this monkey mind, or the mind in a state of restlessness. But let's delve deeper into what happens in the brain during this time of restful thinking. The default mode network is a network of brain regions that are active when we're not engaged in a specific task, like when we're letting our minds wander. It's when we're not focused on the external world, but instead, we're focusing inward. The DMN is connected to several regions of the brain, including the medial prefrontal cortex, posterior cingulate cortex, and angular gyrus, regions associated with self-reflection, memory, and imagination. Imagine a radio playing quietly in the background while you work. You're not really paying attention to the music, but it's still there, influencing your mood and thoughts. This is similar to the DMN's role. It's not actively engaged in specific tasks, but it's always subtly shaping your experience, drawing from past memories, projecting future possibilities, and feeding your internal narrative. This network allows us to reflect on our lives, but it can also trap us in cycles of unnecessary thinking. The DMN isn't inherently harmful, it's part of our brain's natural function. However, when the mind is stuck in this default mode for too long, it can lead to the habitual thinking we talked about earlier, overthinking, rumination, and the sense of being lost in our own mental world. One of the most intriguing aspects of the DMN is its relationship with the self. When the DMN is active, we tend to think about ourselves. The medial prefrontal cortex, in particular, is engaged when we're considering our own thoughts, emotions, and experiences. It's here that the concept of the self is constructed. But this is not a fixed or stable self, it's fluid, constantly shifting based on our experiences, past memories, and imagined futures. In Buddhism, the concept of the self is considered an illusion, anatta, meaning no self. The mind's endless thoughts about who we are, what we want, and what we fear, all revolve around this illusory self. When we get caught up in the thoughts of I, me, and mine, we are reinforcing the illusion of a permanent self. The Buddha taught that this illusion of the self is a primary source of suffering. When we believe that the self is something fixed and real, we cling to it. We try to protect it, build it up, and defend it against the world. This is where the DMN's influence becomes particularly potent. The more the DMN is active, the more we are likely to think about ourselves and our personal narrative. We replay past interactions, wonder what others think of us, and anticipate future events where we envision ourselves at the center. In many ways, the DMN amplifies the sense of self, keeping us trapped in the cycle of ego-driven thoughts. The Buddha's teachings on anatta, no self, are revolutionary in this context. He explained that our attachment to the self, this idea that, I am this person, I am separate from the world, is a fundamental cause of suffering. The more we attach to the idea of me, the more we feel the need to control, protect, and defend it. The more we hold on to this illusion, the more we suffer. A famous story in Buddhism illustrates this beautifully. A monk once asked the Buddha, "What is the self?" The Buddha responded by asking him to look at a bowl of water. If the water is disturbed, what happens to the reflection in the water? The Buddha asked. The monk replied, "It becomes distorted." Exactly, the Buddha said. Just as the reflection is distorted by the disturbance of the water, our understanding of the self is distorted by our attachment to it. When we let go of this attachment, the reflection becomes clear again. This story highlights the deep connection between the self and our attachment to thoughts. Just like the disturbed water that distorts the reflection, our attachment to our thoughts about who we are distorts our understanding of reality. Letting go of this attachment can lead to a clearer, more peaceful state of mind. Here's where it gets interesting. Research has shown that mindfulness practices can actually reduce activity in the DMN. When we practice mindfulness, we shift from a mode of self-referential thinking to a more present-focused awareness. Studies using fMRI scans have shown that mindfulness meditation decreases the activity in the DMN, allowing the brain to quiet down. Think of mindfulness as hitting the pause button on the mental chatter. When you bring your attention to your breath, your body, or the present moment, you're effectively turning down the volume on the DMN's constant hum. This shift allows you to step out of the endless cycle of self-referential thinking and into the present moment, where true peace can be found. Buddhism offers a practical example of this through the practice of samatha, calm abiding, meditation. In this practice, meditators focus on one object, usually the breath or a mantra, to calm the mind and bring it to the present. Over time, this practice helps to reduce the constant chatter of the mind and allows the practitioner to see their thoughts clearly without becoming attached to them. In a study conducted at the University of California, researchers found that participants who practiced mindfulness meditation regularly showed decreased activation in the DMN, which led to a reduction in symptoms of anxiety and depression. This scientific finding aligns with the Buddha's teachings on the importance of training the mind to focus and let go of attachments. Imagine a typical day. You wake up and immediately start thinking about all the things you need to do. As the day goes on, your thoughts are all over the place: plans for work, worries about relationships, fears about the future. These thoughts pull you away from the present moment, creating a sense of tension and unease. This is the DMN in action, drawing you into a web of self-referential thoughts. Now, picture this: you take a few moments to breathe deeply and focus on the present. You notice the sensations in your body, the sounds around you, and the way your breath feels as it moves in and out. As you focus on the present, the mental chatter begins to quiet. You are no longer caught up in the endless cycle of overthinking. You've shifted out of the DMN and into a state of mindfulness, where you can experience clarity and peace. The more we practice mindfulness, the more we train our brains to quiet the constant noise of the DMN. By focusing on the present moment, we break the cycle of overthinking and create space for stillness and insight. Let's consider a real-life example. A woman named Mai had always struggled with anxiety. Her mind would constantly race with thoughts about the future, her career, and her relationships. She would replay conversations over and over, worrying about what others thought of her. But after several months of practicing mindfulness meditation, she began to notice a shift. She no longer became entangled in her thoughts. When anxiety arose, she simply observed it without attaching to it. The more she practiced, the more she experienced moments of calm. Mai's transformation is a testament to the power of mindfulness in reducing the influence of the DMN. Through consistent practice, she learned to step out of the endless cycle of overthinking and find peace in the present moment. The default mode network, while natural and necessary for many functions, can also keep us trapped in an endless loop of thoughts about the self, reinforcing the illusion of an unchanging I. By practicing mindfulness and letting go of our attachment to these thoughts, we can quiet the mind and experience moments of true peace. The Buddha's teachings guide us toward this state of awareness, showing us that the key to freedom lies not in battling the mind, but in simply stepping aside and observing it with clarity and understanding. Part 3. What happens when you stop thinking? Imagine, for a moment, that you could step outside the constant stream of thoughts that dominate your mind. What would it feel like to experience life without the incessant commentary running in the background? What would it be like to truly stop thinking? For most of us, this idea seems impossible. Thoughts are so deeply ingrained in our daily lives that we often fail to notice how much we are constantly thinking. But the Buddha's teachings invite us to explore what happens when we can stop this mental chatter, even if just for a moment. In this part, we will examine what occurs when we stop thinking and how this experience can lead to profound peace, clarity, and spiritual awakening. First, let's clarify what we mean by stopping thinking. We are not referring to the complete absence of thoughts. This is nearly impossible for most of us. Instead, we are speaking about ceasing the habitual attachment to every thought that arises. Often, our minds become like a crowded marketplace, with thoughts coming and going, each one vying for attention. This constant stream of thinking creates a sense of restlessness, leaving us feeling overwhelmed and distracted. The Buddha taught that most of our thoughts are driven by attachment and aversion, our desires, fears, and judgments about the world around us. These thoughts arise unbidden and often take us far away from the present moment. We become prisoners of our own minds, constantly reacting to whatever thought happens to occupy our attention. In reality, we are not in control of our thoughts, they are in control of us. What happens when we stop this automatic process of reacting to every thought? The answer lies in the Buddhist concept of mindfulness. When we practice mindfulness, we become aware of the thoughts without becoming entangled in them. We create a space between the thought and our reaction, allowing us to observe the thought without automatically accepting or rejecting it. This is the essence of stopping thinking. It's not about forcing our minds to be empty, but about creating awareness and detachment from the flow of thoughts. When we stop attaching to our thoughts, something profound happens, silence begins to emerge. This silence is not a void or emptiness, but a spaciousness within the mind. It's as though the endless chatter fades into the background, and we are left with a sense of stillness. This stillness is not passive or dull, it is vibrant and full of potential. In this space of silence, we can experience life directly, without the distortion of our judgments and preferences. Think of it like standing by a quiet lake. The water is still, reflecting the sky with perfect clarity. When the surface is disturbed by wind or waves, the reflection becomes distorted and unclear. Similarly, when our minds are filled with the noise of constant thinking, our perception of reality becomes cloudy and confused. But when we stop thinking and let the mind settle, the reflection of the world becomes clear and undistorted. The Buddha compared the mind to a clear pool of water. When the water is stirred by the wind of thoughts, it becomes murky and difficult to see through. But when the water settles, the bottom becomes visible. In the same way, when we stop thinking, we return to our true nature, clear, still, and perceptive. One of the most striking effects of stopping thinking is the ability to be fully present in the moment. When our minds are not distracted by endless thoughts, we can truly engage with what is happening around us. We become more attuned to our senses, the feeling of the air on our skin, the sounds of nature, the taste of food, the touch of a loved one. These simple experiences, which we often overlook, come into sharp focus when we stop thinking. In the Buddhist practice of zazen, seated meditation, practitioners are taught to focus on the breath, allowing each inhalation and exhalation to draw their attention away from the constant flow of thoughts. In this way, they experience the full richness of the present moment. The mind is not cluttered with past regrets or future worries, it is simply here, now, with the breath. In our everyday lives, we can apply this practice by learning to be more mindful in each activity we do. Whether it's washing dishes, walking, or talking with a friend, we can choose to be fully present in the experience, rather than letting our minds wander. When we stop thinking, we come alive in the present moment, experiencing life as it truly is. Another powerful consequence of stopping thinking is the liberation from the ego, the false sense of self that is constantly constructed and reconstructed by our thoughts. The ego thrives on thought. It feeds on our judgments, labels, and the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and what we need. When we stop thinking, the ego loses its grip on us. We no longer define ourselves by the thoughts that arise in our minds, and this opens up a vast space for a deeper, more authentic sense of self to emerge. The Buddha taught that the self, or Atman, is an illusion, an ever-changing collection of thoughts, memories, and experiences. When we stop identifying with the thoughts and labels that we attach to ourselves, we begin to experience our true nature, which is boundless and free. The more we let go of the ego, the more we open ourselves to the wisdom and peace that lie beyond the constant noise of the mind. This liberation from the ego is not about losing our individuality or becoming less of who we are. Rather, it's about releasing the false identification with the ego and recognizing that we are part of something much greater than ourselves. When we stop thinking, we stop reinforcing the boundaries of the self, and we come to realize our interconnectedness with all beings. Neuroscience provides fascinating insights into what happens when we stop thinking. Research on mindfulness and meditation has shown that the brain undergoes significant changes when we practice stopping the constant flow of thoughts. Studies have found that regular meditation leads to increased gray matter in the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain associated with attention, decision-making, and emotional regulation. This suggests that when we stop thinking and practice mindfulness, we strengthen the brain's ability to focus and maintain emotional balance. Moreover, stopping thinking activates the brain's default mode network, DMN, but in a more controlled, balanced way. The DMN is responsible for mind-wandering and self-referential thinking. However, when we engage in mindfulness practices, the DMN becomes less active during moments of quiet, which leads to greater clarity and peace of mind. Researchers have also discovered that mindfulness can reduce activity in the amygdala, the part of the brain associated with fear and stress. This explains why stopping thinking can have such a calming effect on the body and mind. By quieting the mental noise, we reduce our physiological response to stress and anxiety, leading to a sense of calm and relaxation. To illustrate the power of stopping thinking, let's look at the story of Sakyamuni, the Buddha. After years of intense searching for truth, the Buddha sat beneath the Bodhi tree in deep meditation, determined to find the answers to the nature of life and suffering. During his meditation, he experienced the full range of thoughts, temptations, doubts, fears, and desires, but he did not engage with them. Instead, he observed them as they arose and let them pass without attachment. In that moment of stillness, the Buddha experienced enlightenment. He transcended the limitations of the ego and the endless chatter of the mind, and he realized the ultimate truth of the nature of existence: all things are impermanent, and true peace comes from letting go of attachment. This is the ultimate example of stopping thinking, not as a mere cessation of mental activity, but as a profound transformation of the mind, where one experiences life directly, without the distortion of thought. So, how can we begin to practice stopping thinking in our daily lives? Here are a few simple steps that can help us experience the stillness that comes from quieting the mind. 1. Practice deep breathing. When you notice the mind racing, take a few deep breaths and bring your attention to the present moment. Focus on the sensation of the breath entering and leaving the body. This simple practice can help you detach from the constant flow of thoughts and create a sense of inner calm. 2. Engage in mindful activities. Whether it's walking, eating, or listening to music, choose an activity that allows you to be fully present. Engage all your senses and immerse yourself in the experience, letting go of any distracting thoughts. 3. Meditate regularly. Meditation is a powerful tool for learning to stop thinking. Even just 5 to 10 minutes a day can help you cultivate awareness and create space between your thoughts. Start by focusing on your breath, and gently bring your attention back whenever your mind wanders. 4. Let go of judgment. When thoughts arise, don't judge them as good or bad. Simply observe them and let them go. The more you practice this non-judgmental awareness, the more your mind will naturally quiet. 5. Spend time in silence. Spend time each day in complete silence, free from distractions. Use this time to simply be, without any agenda or thoughts. This practice helps to cultivate a sense of inner peace and stillness. In summary, stopping thinking is not about eliminating all mental activity, but about cultivating awareness and detachment from the constant noise of the mind. When we stop thinking, we enter a space of silence, presence, and liberation from the ego. This practice allows us to experience life directly, without the filter of judgment or attachment. By embracing the Part 5, the illusion of the self. Have you ever stopped to wonder who you truly are? That self we carry with us, the name, the story, the role, often feels so real, so essential to our identity. Yet, the Buddha taught that this self is nothing more than an illusion, a mental construct built from thoughts, memories, and attachments. In this part, we will explore the illusion of the self and how understanding its true nature can lead us to freedom and peace. The first step in understanding the illusion of the self is to recognize that what we call the self is not a permanent, unchanging entity. Instead, it is a collection of thoughts, beliefs, and experiences that we identify with. These elements constantly shift and change, yet we cling to them, creating a false sense of continuity. Imagine a river flowing relentlessly downstream. The water is constantly changing, but we are unable to hold on to any one drop. Similarly, the thoughts and experiences that make up our sense of self are in constant flux. Yet, we believe there is a me who is separate from everything else, a self that persists over time. The Buddha taught that this belief in a fixed self is the root cause of suffering. In reality, the self is like the reflection in a mirror. The reflection appears to be a solid, fixed image, yet it is not real. It is simply the result of light bouncing off the surface, dependent on the mirror and the surrounding environment. In the same way, our identity is dependent on countless factors, our body, our past, our relationships, but none of these define us in a permanent, unchanging way. The Buddha's central teaching on the illusion of the self is encapsulated in the doctrine of anatta, the concept of no self. According to this teaching, there is no permanent, independent self that exists apart from the world. Rather, what we consider to be self is simply a temporary collection of physical and mental processes that arise and dissolve in each moment. The Buddha compared the self to a chariot. If you take apart the chariot, removing the wheels, the axles, the seat, there is nothing left to call chariot. Similarly, if you break down the components of the body and mind, the physical body, the senses, thoughts, and emotions, what remains? There is no permanent self that exists independent of these processes. It is an illusion, a name we give to the ever-changing collection of experiences. When we begin to understand this teaching, we start to see how much of our suffering comes from clinging to the idea of a permanent self. We hold on to our desires, fears, and memories as if they define who we are, but they are fleeting and impermanent. By recognizing the illusory nature of the self, we free ourselves from the need to defend, protect, and cling to an identity that is ultimately ungraspable. At the core of the illusion of the self is the ego, the sense of I, or me, that we carry with us throughout life. The ego is a product of our attachment to the body and mind. It arises from our need for recognition, validation, and control over our environment. We identify with our thoughts, our possessions, our relationships, and even our suffering, creating a false sense of separation from others. The Buddha taught that the ego is a root cause of suffering because it leads us to believe that we are separate from the world and from others. This belief in separation leads to fear, competition, and conflict. The more we identify with the ego, the more we become trapped in a cycle of desire and aversion, always seeking more while avoiding what we don't want. This cycle is unending, and it keeps us from experiencing true peace and freedom. Consider the story of a person who spends their entire life chasing after status, wealth, and success. They build an identity around their achievements, but in the end, they find that no amount of recognition or material gain brings lasting fulfillment. The more they identify with the ego, the more they experience anxiety, because the ego is always in need of validation and control. When we stop identifying with the ego and recognize it as a fleeting illusion, we can let go of the need to constantly prove ourselves. Here's the paradox: in order to truly understand the nature of the self, we must first experience the illusion of it. This might sound contradictory, but the Buddha's teachings invite us to look deeply into the nature of our own minds. We must examine our thoughts and experiences, not to solidify our sense of self, but to see through the illusion that creates it. One of the most profound practices for seeing through the illusion of the self is meditation. As we meditate, we begin to observe the flow of thoughts without getting attached to them. We see that thoughts arise and pass away, but they do not define us. The more we observe the mind in this way, the more we begin to see that the self we identify with is simply a mental construction, a collection of thoughts, memories, and desires that we hold on to as if they are permanent. In reality, they are constantly changing, and so is the self they create. When we let go of the belief in a permanent self, we experience a profound freedom. We no longer feel the need to defend our identity or protect our ego. We no longer feel the pressure to live up to external expectations or to compare ourselves to others. This freedom comes from the realization that we are not defined by our thoughts, our emotions, or our achievements. We are simply beings in the present moment, connected to the world around us. In this freedom, we find peace. When we stop clinging to the idea of a fixed self, we can embrace the impermanence of life and let go of our attachment to outcomes. We stop identifying with success and failure, gain and loss, and we can simply be. In this space of freedom, we are no longer controlled by the ego's desire for validation. Instead, we can experience life with clarity, compassion, and joy. One of the most transformative aspects of letting go of the illusion of the self is realizing the interconnectedness of all beings. When we believe in a separate self, we see ourselves as isolated, disconnected from the world. This belief in separation creates fear and division. But when we let go of the ego and the illusion of the self, we come to understand that we are part of a larger whole. We are not isolated individuals, but part of the vast network of life that is constantly in flux. In the Buddhist tradition, this is often described as interdependence. Every being, every phenomenon, is interconnected. We exist because of countless causes and conditions. Our thoughts, our actions, and our experiences are all part of a vast web of interconnectedness. When we let go of the illusion of a separate self, we see that we are not alone, we are part of a greater whole, and our actions have an impact on others. This understanding of interconnectedness can deepen our compassion and empathy. When we stop seeing others as separate from ourselves, we can truly begin to care for their well-being, not out of obligation, but because we recognize that their happiness is our happiness. This realization leads to a profound sense of unity and peace, as we move away from the ego's tendency to divide and separate, and instead embrace the truth of our shared humanity. To illustrate the power of letting go of the illusion of the self, let's turn to the story of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion. Avalokiteshvara is often depicted with many arms and eyes, symbolizing the ability to reach out and see the suffering of all beings. The Bodhisattva embodies the realization that all beings are interconnected, and that true compassion arises from recognizing the interconnectedness of all life. Avalokiteshvara is said to have vowed to remain in the cycle of birth and death until all beings are liberated from suffering. This vow is an expression of the Bodhisattva's deep understanding that the self is not separate from others. In the Bodhisattva's eyes, the suffering of others is their own suffering, and their liberation is their own liberation. By letting go of the illusion of a separate self, Avalokiteshvara embodies the ultimate compassion, the willingness to be present for others and to help them find peace, knowing that in doing so, we also find peace. Part 6, Finding the Balance Between Thought and Stillness. In a world filled with constant noise and distraction, achieving a balance between the active mind and the quiet stillness of the present moment can seem like an impossible task. Our thoughts race from one thing to the next, often overwhelming us with worries, plans, and judgments. Yet, in Buddhism, there is a deep and profound wisdom about finding the middle ground between thought and stillness, where peace, clarity, and insight reside. This balance, which is often misunderstood as an unattainable ideal, is in fact a living, breathing practice. In this section, we will explore how to find harmony between the mental chatter of our minds and the stillness that offers us true peace. Through this exploration, we will uncover the ancient teachings that guide us towards a balanced state of being and the practical steps to integrate stillness into our daily lives. To understand the balance between thought and stillness, it is helpful to visualize the mind as a lake. In its natural state, a lake is clear and still, reflecting the sky above. But when the wind blows, ripples form on the surface. The water becomes disturbed, and the once clear reflections are obscured. Our thoughts are like the wind that stirs the lake. When the mind is caught up in constant thinking, it becomes turbulent, and clarity is lost. However, just as a lake naturally returns to stillness when the wind dies down, the mind too can return to a state of peace when we cease to follow every thought. The key is not to push away the wind entirely, but to recognize when it is simply stirring the waters, and to allow the mind to return to a more balanced state. This requires practice, patience, and understanding. Thoughts are not inherently bad or disruptive. They are a natural part of being human and serve essential purposes. Thoughts help us navigate the world, solve problems, and plan for the future. They are the tools with which we interact with our surroundings. Without thoughts, we would be unable to make decisions or process our experiences. But just as tools are meant to serve us, rather than control us, thoughts should serve the mind, not dominate it. The problem arises when we become overly identified with our thoughts. We begin to believe that we are our thoughts. This identification creates a sense of separation and a false sense of self. We grasp onto thoughts and allow them to drive us, rather than observing them with awareness. The Buddha often taught that the mind is like a monkey, restless, jumping from one branch to another. If we let it run wild, it can lead us into confusion and suffering. But if we cultivate mindfulness and awareness, we can train the monkey to sit still and observe the world without becoming entangled in it. Stillness, on the other hand, is not a state of mindless emptiness or dullness. It is a state of awareness. In stillness, we are fully present, but without the constant pull of thought. Stillness is like a deep, silent well, a place where clarity arises naturally, like water drawn from the depths. It is in stillness that we can hear the wisdom of our hearts and the quiet voice of intuition. But stillness is not an escape from the world or a withdrawal from life. It is, instead, a deep connection to the present moment, free from the distractions of past regrets or future anxieties. The Buddha spoke of this kind of stillness as right mindfulness, a state of full awareness in the present moment, where we observe our thoughts, emotions, and experiences without judgment or attachment. Stillness allows us to see things as they truly are. It is in this space that we can observe our thoughts, feelings, and reactions without being controlled by them. Just as a skilled musician knows when to pause between notes, stillness teaches us to pause between thoughts. In that space between thoughts, we find our true nature, the nature of pure awareness, free from the clutter of the ego. Finding balance between thought and stillness is not about rejecting one for the other. It is about learning to coexist with both in a harmonious way. The challenge is to observe our thoughts without getting lost in them, and to experience stillness without trying to escape the world around us. The Buddha's teachings on the middle way are a perfect guide to this balance. The middle way is the path of moderation, avoiding both extremes of indulgence and denial. In the context of thought and stillness, this means not suppressing the mind, nor letting it run wild, but instead cultivating a practice of awareness that allows both thought and stillness to coexist. Consider the analogy of a tree. The tree needs both roots and branches to grow. The roots ground it in the earth, providing stability, while the branches reach upward toward the sky, seeking the light. Thoughts can be compared to the branches, they reach outward, helping us interact with the world. Stillness, on the other hand, is like the roots, providing the foundation for clarity and wisdom. Both are necessary for balance. The great wisdom of the Buddha and other enlightened teachers speaks clearly about the importance of this balance. One famous saying of the Buddha is, "Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it." In this quote, the Buddha is pointing to the mental barriers we create through constant thinking, fear, and attachment. These barriers keep us from experiencing the love, peace, and connection that are already within us. When we stop identifying with our thoughts and allow ourselves to rest in stillness, these barriers dissolve, and love and wisdom naturally emerge. Another powerful teaching comes from the Zen tradition. The Zen master Shunryu Suzuki once said, "In the beginner's mind there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind there are few." This teaching points to the importance of cultivating a mind that is open, spacious, and free from attachment. When we are too attached to our thoughts, our minds become narrow and rigid. But when we can let go of our need to control every thought, we create the space for new insights, creative solutions, and a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us. One of the most beautiful stories of balance in Buddhist tradition is that of the Zen monk, Hakuin. Hakuin was a well-known monk in Japan who was famous for his Zen teachings and for the simplicity of his practice. One day, Hakuin was walking through the village when a woman approached him with a question. "Master, what is the secret to a peaceful mind?" Hakuin, always the teacher, smiled and said, "A peaceful mind is like a pond. When the water is calm, the reflection is clear. But when the water is disturbed, the reflection is clouded." The woman thought for a moment, and then asked, "How do I make the pond calm?" Hakuin replied, "Let go of your attachment to the waves, the ripples, and the thoughts. When you cease chasing the waves, the water will return to its natural stillness." This simple teaching encapsulates the essence of finding balance between thought and stillness. We do not need to force the mind into stillness, nor do we need to reject our thoughts. We simply need to let go of our attachment to them, allowing the mind to return to its natural state of peace. So, how can we begin to cultivate the balance between thought and stillness in our own lives? Here are some practices that can help. 1. Mindfulness meditation. practice sitting in stillness and observing your thoughts. Notice how thoughts come and go like clouds in the sky. Do not chase them, but simply let them pass by. 2. Breathing exercises. Focus on your breath, the natural rhythm of inhaling and exhaling. The breath is a powerful anchor that can help you return to the present moment whenever your mind starts to wander. 3. Pause before reacting. When you find yourself reacting to a situation, pause. Take a deep breath, and allow yourself a moment of stillness before responding. This pause creates space between thought and action, allowing you to respond with clarity. 4. Cultivate awareness in daily life. Try to bring mindfulness to everyday activities, such as walking, eating, or even washing dishes. Pay attention to the sensations in your body and the environment around you. This practice helps train the mind to stay present and balanced. Finding the balance between thought and stillness is not about forcing the mind to be still, nor is it about allowing thoughts to run rampant. It is about learning to live in harmony with both. In the quiet moments of stillness, we can hear the wisdom that lies within us. In the moments of thought, we can bring awareness and clarity. By practicing mindfulness, observing the mind, and letting go of attachment, we can create a space where both thought and stillness coexist in harmony. This balance is the key to a peaceful, fulfilled life, a life where we are grounded in the present moment, free from the pull of distraction, and open to the beauty of each passing thought. Chapter 7. What if thinking stops completely? The thought of completely silencing the mind is a profound and almost unsettling concept. In a world that is conditioned to value productivity, constant activity, and endless analysis, the idea of thinking ceasing entirely seems almost impossible, or even undesirable. Yet, this is precisely the kind of radical stillness that many ancient spiritual traditions, especially Buddhism, encourage us to explore. But what happens when thinking stops completely? Is it possible to live in a state of pure awareness, free from the constant churn of mental activity? In this section, we'll delve into this ultimate question: what would happen if thinking ceased entirely? And more importantly, what wisdom can we draw from this inquiry to bring peace and clarity into our own lives? Before we address the question of complete cessation of thought, it is essential to first understand the nature of thought itself. Thoughts are like clouds in the sky. They appear, shift, and eventually dissipate. They are not permanent, nor are they inherently us. They simply arise based on various conditions, past experiences, desires, fears, and external stimuli. In Buddhist teachings, the mind is often described as a monkey mind, restless and jumping from one thought to another. This analogy illustrates how the mind is constantly active, always thinking, analyzing, and evaluating. While the mind's activity is not inherently harmful, it becomes problematic when we become attached to it, mistaking our thoughts for our identity. We lose touch with our true nature and get caught in the cycle of suffering. However, the Buddha's teachings point to a way of stepping back from the incessant flow of thoughts and experiencing a deeper level of awareness, one that is not dominated by the constant noise of the mind. In meditation, the goal is often to quiet the mind, to allow the thoughts to arise without identifying with them, and to create space for stillness to emerge. But what if the mind could reach a point where thinking ceases completely? What would that look like? In Buddhism, there is a state called shunyata, often translated as emptiness. This state is not an emptiness of nothingness, but rather the absence of the habitual patterns of attachment and identification that shape our experience of reality. It is a state where the mind is clear, present, and free from the clutter of thoughts, emotions, and judgments. When thinking stops completely, this state of pure awareness emerges. It is often described as a vast, open space where the mind is not caught in the past or future. There are no attachments, no judgments, and no labels. The mind simply is, and in this state, it can fully experience reality without distortion. This is what some meditation traditions refer to as the state of no mind, or beginner's mind, a pure, untainted awareness that is open and receptive to the present moment. This state of pure awareness is not an absence of consciousness. On the contrary, it is a heightened sense of awareness, an awareness that is not clouded by the constant flow of thoughts and distractions. It is as if the mind has peeled back the layers of noise to reveal a deeper, more profound level of clarity. In this state, we are not separate from the world around us, we are fully integrated into it, experiencing life directly as it is. But what happens to thought when the mind reaches a state of no mind? Does thinking completely cease forever? The answer lies in understanding the difference between thinking and awareness. Thought, as we have seen, is not the problem. The issue arises when we become identified with our thoughts, believing that they are who we are. When thinking stops completely, it does not mean that we are devoid of any mental activity. It simply means that the incessant chatter of the mind quiets down. In this space, the mind is clear and focused, free from the constant distractions of judgment, comparison, and analysis. In Zen, this state of clarity and focus is often described as the mind of a flower. The flower blooms without any effort or intention, it simply is. In the same way, when we are free from the noise of the mind, we are able to experience life more fully and directly. Thoughts arise, but they no longer dominate our experience. We are present, aware, and at peace. One of the most profound insights that arise when thinking ceases completely is the realization of the illusion of the self. When the mind is still, free from thought, we experience a sense of interconnectedness with all things. The boundaries between the self and the world blur, and we come to understand that the ego, our sense of I, or me, is merely a construct of the mind. This realization is not about self-denial or annihilation. It is about recognizing that the sense of self is not a fixed, permanent entity, but rather a collection of thoughts, memories, and experiences that we cling to. When thinking stops, we see through the illusion of this self and realize that our true nature is not separate from the world around us. We are part of the vast, interconnected web of life. In Buddhist philosophy, this is often referred to as the realization of anatta, or non-self. It is the understanding that the self is not a permanent, unchanging entity, but rather a dynamic process that arises in relation to other phenomena. When thinking ceases, we experience a deep sense of liberation from the ego and the illusion of separation. What happens when thinking ceases completely is, in many ways, a glimpse of enlightenment. Enlightenment is not a state of perpetual thoughtlessness but rather a profound shift in perception. It is the recognition that the mind's habitual patterns, its attachment to thoughts, feelings, and desires, create the illusion of a separate self. When these patterns dissolve, we are left with a clear, open awareness of reality as it truly is. This state of awareness is often described as a moment of profound peace, a peace that is not dependent on external circumstances but arises naturally when the mind is free from the clutter of thought. It is a state of sati, or mindfulness, where we are fully present in each moment, without the need to label or judge our experiences. In this state, there is no need to chase after thoughts or to cling to them. The mind is simply content to be as it is, present and aware. There are countless stories in Buddhist tradition that point to the profound effects of a quiet mind. One famous story is that of the great Zen master, Linji, who is known for his direct and sometimes shocking methods of teaching. One day, Linji was asked, "What is the way to enlightenment?" In response, he struck the questioner with a stick. The student, stunned, asked again, "But what is the way?" Linji replied, "I have already told you. You are asking for the answer with your thoughts. Let them go." This story encapsulates the essence of what happens when thinking stops completely. The mind is freed from the habitual patterns that limit our perception, and we can experience life directly, without the need for conceptualization or judgment. Ultimately, the question of what happens when thinking stops completely is not one that can be easily answered with words. It is a question that each of us must explore within ourselves, through direct experience. What happens is a deep sense of freedom. Freedom from the tyranny of the constantly churning thoughts, freedom from the attachment to the self, and freedom from the endless cycle of desire and aversion. This freedom is not an escape from life. On the contrary, it is a deeper engagement with life. When the mind is no longer occupied with distractions, we can experience life more fully. We can respond to situations with clarity, compassion, and insight, rather than reacting out of habit or fear. In the absence of thought, there is a profound sense of peace and presence, a peace that arises naturally when we let go of the mind's incessant chatter. While complete cessation of thought may not be a permanent state, we can still cultivate moments of stillness in our daily lives. These moments allow us to reconnect with our true nature and experience a deeper level of clarity and peace. Here are some practical ways to invite more stillness into your life. 1. Mindfulness meditation. Practice sitting in silence, observing your thoughts without judgment. When thoughts arise, simply let them go, returning your focus to your breath or to the present moment. 2. Silent retreats. Consider taking time away from the noise and distractions of daily life by going on a silent retreat. These retreats provide a container for deep stillness and self-inquiry. 3. Nature walks. Spend time in nature, allowing the environment to soothe your mind and bring you into a state of presence. As you walk, focus on the sensations of your body and the sounds around you. 4. Letting go of attachment. Throughout your day, practice letting go of your attachment to thoughts, labels, and judgments. Simply observe them as they come and go, without identifying with them. Thank you for watching. You've just taken a step closer to mastering your thoughts and unlocking the peace that resides within you. If this video resonated with you, don't leave just yet. Subscribe to Serenity Path for more content that will help you deepen your mindfulness practice and gain profound insights into the workings of the mind. Drop a comment below and let us know your thoughts, or share your experience with letting go of mental noise. Remember, the path to serenity begins with one simple choice, the choice to quiet the mind. Until next time, stay mindful, stay peaceful.